What I want to know is how does one get involved in doing rock work as a woman? Do you really, really want to know? Or do you just want the rehearsed response that I always give? What would happen if we chose to really tell the truth about ourselves? Like if we really, really just told the real truth of our lives. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm saying that it's my truth.
You're listening to Hammered.
I believe that denial is one of the strongest drugs on the planet. Living in denial is a way to hang on to some element of control. Anybody in their right mind would have looked at this situation with this ice cream job and this ice cream company and the ice cream people and thought, good grief, can't you see how crazy and dysfunctional and fucked up this is? ? It's not really the surroundings. It's not really the people. It's not really the circumstances. It's about the inner workings of addiction and looking for something outside of yourself. And for myself, I was on a constant quest to fill an emptiness and a longing and a sadness, and just to find the perfect person that would make all my dreams come true. Isn't that how we're raised? Isn't that what we grow up to believe in? That there's some other magical other that will come into our lives and, complete us in some fucking Jerry Maguire movie. Regina was a very kind person, and Regina had gone through her own set of traumas and dramas. So she was sort of at a place in her life where she was depending on that past to make her stronger. And she was also still seeking outside of herself for that other person to help her, as women do. But I did love her as my friend, and I did trust her. And she kept trying to talk some sense into me and to help me. The next afternoon, after that whole event wore off, it was probably around 5-6 o'clock, and I thought, okay, I've got to find out what happened. So I went on my motorcycle to where I knew that Lisa's ice cream route was, because the thing about an ice cream truck driver is they'll always show up. It doesn't matter how sick you are, how bad you feel, you will show up to your route because you need that money. You need that money to pay rent and to buy food and to buy booze and et cetera, et cetera. So I went around where I knew her route was, and I kind of knew what time periods that she hit this lake. It was up somewhere around Lawrenceville. So I rode my motorcycle and kind of just rode around, and sure enough, there she was. And I came up and she saw me, and we went over to a parking lot, and I got in the ice cream truck with her. And I asked her everything that had happened and if Allison was okay. And she said, well, you did a number on her, and she called her mother, and her mother was some real estate agent, and her mother kind of said to her, well, if you lay down with dogs, you're going to get fleas. And when Lisa said that to me, oh God, me? Like I'm a dog? Like am I, it was like I felt so low. Like nobody had ever said something to me like that. And it just stung me. It just made me really, I felt horrible. If you lay down with dogs, you're going to get fleas. And so we sat in the ice cream truck and talked, and I asked her again about that shark bite on her leg, and she wouldn't tell me. That was a constant question. I kept thinking one day she would tell me how she got that scar on her leg, and she wouldn't. But we sat there, and I remember looking at her, telling her, I've got to get out of this. I've got to find a way out of this. And she agreed, and she said, yeah, me too. And so I went on, and the next day when I got my ice cream truck, I went out and haphazardly did my route. And I was coming home that night, and I was going to go back to my dad's, and I pulled into a gas station. And I was filling my ice cream truck up for the next day. And there was this girl pumping gas on the other gas pump. And she looked familiar, and she looked at me, and she said, Jill? And I kind of looked, and I kept thinking, how do I know her? How do I know her? And she goes, it's Debbie from Big Star. And I went, oh. And this girl, Debbie, had worked at the deli, and I was in the cheese shop. She was kind of like over the aisle from me. And we started laughing. I go, oh, yeah, Big Star, and where we wore the outfits, and we laughed. And I said, are you still working there? She goes, oh, no, I got a new job. I'm working with this new company. It's a private mail company, and they do like mail delivery. It's kind of like they're subcontracted from the post office, because Atlanta was growing so rapidly that the post offices really couldn't keep up with the corporate world and all these businesses. And so she went on and told me about her job and how she was working in the warehouse sorting and doing all these mail. I didn't really understand what she's talking about, but she said, yeah, it's really a great job. And I said, oh, well, that's good. And I said, are they hiring? And she goes, well, I don't know, maybe. And she goes, I could put in a word for you, because I'm pretty close to the owner. He's this really good looking guy named Wayne. And I kind of thought, oh, okay. And she said, I mean, seriously, I could probably put a word for you. I said, why don't you just give me their number? And so she gave me their number, and, I kind of put it in my pocket, and I thought, well, I might call them, I might not. Here's the thing. When you're in this addictive world, it's like you don't want to let go of control. And I didn't want to let go of the independence that I had with this ice cream job, because I could do whatever the hell I wanted to do. And I could still make money, but there was nowhere to go. There wasn't any kind of growth. It wasn't like I was going to become some ice cream tycoon in the world. But I would just continue, because it allowed me, it enabled me to continue doing what I was doing, because the cash was a daily thing, and I could get this cash every single day. But I didn't know where I was going to draw the line. I got back to my dad's apartment that night, and I got back a little bit earlier than usual, and he wasn't there. And so I decided I would just go to bed. I was just depressed and all these thoughts, and I drank a few beers and smoked a bowl out of the back window in my bedroom, and I remember just thinking, I can't keep going like this, and I just didn't know what to do with all of it. And I had to drink. I had way too much anxiety in my nervous system without it. I couldn't go without having some sort of substance. And so I remember laying down and my mind was racing, and I kind of heard some banging around outside, and I just laid there real quiet, and I could hear my dad's voice, and he was talking to someone at the door, and then I heard him unlock the door, and I heard the neighbor, Mike, who lives upstairs. He drove a red Corvette, and he had this blonde kind of trophy wife, and he was sort of like a muscly guy. I don't know what he did for a living, but they were sort of flashy, and so it sounded like he was trying to help my daddy, and he said, "Come on in, Billy, come on in, let me get you in here." And I could hear my dad saying all kinds of muffled stuff, and it sounded like my dad was drunk. And so I just listened really close, and he started saying, you know my daughter, right? You know my daughter." And Mike goes, yeah, we know Jill. Yeah. What do you think about her? What do you think about her? And he goes, well, we like Jill. She's nice. She ain't nothing what she used to be. She was a real good athlete, and she just, I don't know what to do about her. She just all running wild. And he started just telling all this stuff to the neighbor, and my heart was just pounding out of my chest. And the thing about my dad is, like, we never talked. We never had a conversation about anything. I never knew how he felt about anything. I remember going in one time to Caddick right before I went away to college, and I walked into the front where the receptionist was. She was this great woman, and she was always very nice to me, and her daughter had been one of my high school teachers. But I walked in, and I was just there to get some dental forms, insurance forms, and I looked over beside where the reception desk was, and there was this huge glass case, kind of like, you would have trophies in it, like in a gymnasium or something. And I thought it was going to be like a Kodak Awards case or something. And I looked in it, and it said Haynie's Kid. And it had every newspaper clipping that I had had in my high school years. And I couldn't believe it. I was floored. And I had no idea that my dad had any kind of recollection of what I was doing except what I was doing wrong. And I was standing there looking at it. I know my jaw was probably dropped down to the floor. And the receptionist goes, "Don't you like that? We've done that for you." And your dad would bring all the clippings in, and we kind of created that. And I just stood there in shock. And I thought, why couldn't he ever just say one thing? Why didn't he ever just say, "Hey, good game, Curly," or anything? But nothing. Ever. And I guess, my parents were from that old school of thought that you don't give a kid a compliment because they might get the big head. And I remember my mother saying things like, "Well, the only reason that the photographer takes your pictures because he has a crush on you. Not the fact that I scored, 30 points and 20 rebounds or something like that. None of that. It was always some underlying reason, some agenda." And so I guess, when you're programmed to think that everybody's got an agenda and nothing is really good enough, then you just project that out onto everybody else. And I think that's where I'd kind of gotten, even at only this 22 years old. 23, already had it figured out that everybody was against you. Nobody meant what they were saying, and nobody ever tells the truth. So I listened in the floor as my dad went on and on. And then he got to the topic about homosexuality. Oh my God. And this is when I didn't think I was going to be able to lay there anymore. I thought I'm going to come out of there and interject, but I didn't. So Mike, it sounded like he sort of was trying to get away, and he kind of got my dad, I think, in the kind of set up, and then I heard the door close, and I waited, and I laid there, and I waited, and finally I heard my dad snoring, and I smelled cigarette smoke, and I opened my door, and I walked out, and he was passed out in the floor, and there was a cigarette burning in his fingers. And it was so weird for me to see my daddy smoke a cigarette because I never really saw that. I mean, I think he snuck around a lot. He snuck around smoking and drinking when we were growing up, but we never really saw it. So I got the cigarette out of his fingers and I put it out and I just left him in there and I went back to bed. The next day, it was kind of like nothing had happened, of course, and I didn't see him. But all those things that he had said the night before kept ringing through my head over and over. And I went out and I did some ice cream selling, and I was going to come back. And when I got back to the apartments, I went over to this lady's house named Terry across the street, and you could see my dad's apartment from her balcony. And so she and I started drinking Evan Williams and Coke or something, and we're sitting there, and I was telling her the whole big old drama, and she knew that guy across the street in the Corvette. And so I'm just whining and crying about what all my dad had said, which was probably true, most of it. But I was getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and drinking liquor is not a good thing when you're having some emotional problems. And so after a while, I remember I called him on the phone, and I saw him through the sliding glass door because I was standing looking down at him. He had his curtains open, and I saw him get up to answer the phone. I called from Terry's phone, and I said, "Hey." And he goes, "Hey." I go, "I'll be over there in a minute." He goes, "Okay." I said, "I have a bone to pick with you." And I hung up. And I think a part of me sort of just split off. I don't know what happened to me, but I walked over there. He came to the sliding glass door, and he looked at me through the sliding glass door. And when he unlocked that latch, I slung that door open, and I went in and I pushed him, and I said, "You need to sit down." And his eyes got really big, and he was not drinking. And I pushed him and I pushed him and I pushed him into his recliner. And I said, "Get in your chair. Why don't you sit in your chair?" And he sat in his chair, and I went on this complete rant. And I told him if he moved, that I would fucking cut his throat from ear to ear. I started threatening him with everything I had ever heard him say to my mother or say to me or my siblings. And I said, "Don't move." And I just went back and forth in front of him. And then I slapped him in the face. And I said, "This is for the time you beat the shit out of me in front of the duck pond at the Grant Park Zoo." And I rehashed all these fucking events. And it was like my psyche was just vomiting every kind of abusive thing that I could remember that he ever did or said to me. Every basketball game, every track meet, everything where he had degraded me or humiliated me in public. And then I remember bringing up the thing with Mike from the upstairs. Well, this rant continued. And the next thing I know, there's police knocking on the door. And the guy comes in, and wouldn't you know, him and my daddy knew each other from high school, another good old boy. And he told me to sit my ass down, and I remember I was sitting there, and then I started making up some bullshit that my daddy had started to hit me or something. I don't know. It was so messed up. It was so messed up. And I was out of control. Completely out of control. The next morning when I woke up, my fingers were all bleeding. I had bruises all over my hands and my feet. A couple of my fingers looked like they were broken. And I opened my door. I could feel the presence of somebody. And my dad was sitting out in his recliner in silence. I went in the bathroom. I took a shower. I tried to pull myself together. I went back in my bedroom and I got out my checkbook and I wrote a check for $100. And I walked in and I looked at him and I said, "Don't speak to me." And I threw this check on him and I said, "This is for any damages I did because I know all you care about is money anyway." And he just stared at me. And it was one of the most horrible moments because I could not really talk about anything because I didn't know. I didn't even know what was happening to me. And he didn't either. And I think we were both just in this place of limbo of I needed to go. He needed to let me go. But I know that he loved me. And I know that he just wanted me to be okay. And I walked out of there. And I just didn't know what to do. And I went to a payphone. And I called this company that this girl had given me this phone number. And this man answered. And then they connected me to somebody else until I got the owner on the phone. And I said, "Yeah, I ran into my friend Debbie that I used to work with at Big Star Grocery Store. And she gave me your number and said you might be hiring." He goes, "Well, do you have any male experience?" And I said, "No." I said, "But I have driving experience." He goes, "Oh, what kind of driving experience?" "Well, I've been driving an ice cream truck for 2.5 years, almost 3 years now, and I know every street in Atlanta." Well, his ears perked up. He goes, "What do you mean? What kind of routes?" And I said, "Oh, it's just an ice cream business." "What do you mean? Like, do you deliver to stores?" He couldn't figure it out that I was like actually driving an ice cream truck. So I had to explain it. And then I went on to tell him that I'd been top in sales. And I said, really, it's all about, being quick enough because time is money. And I went into my long story of how I could just make my way through the streets and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, "Well, when could you come in? When could you come in to get an interview?" And I said, "Well, whenever." And so we set it up and I rode my motorcycle over there and had an interview and pulled myself together enough to be able to do it. And I could tell he liked me. And so he says, "Well, I'm going to check things out and then we'll let you know," and all that. And sure enough, they called me back and offered me a job. And he said, "You'll have to start out inside kind of sorting to get to know the mailings and the post office numbers. And then we'll probably get you going on a route." And so I called Regina and I told her that I had gotten an offer with this job. And she was like, "Oh my God, Jill, you've got to do it. You've got to do it." And there was still that part of me. There was still that part of me that wanted to just hang on. I didn't want to let go of the ice cream freedom. I didn't want to let go of all the fun, in quotations, that I was having. But there was this other part that was like, you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to do it. And it's that small, still voice that I often try to really listen to. And who knows, maybe I'm psychotic, maybe it's schizophrenia, I don't know. But I went ahead and I told Regina, I've got to make a getaway. I don't know how to do it. And she said, look, if you want a place to live and you take this job, you can come live here for $200 a month for this bedroom. And I made the decision. I took my ice cream truck and I moved my belongings with the ice cream truck to Regina's. And then I took my ice cream truck to the shop. I plugged it in. I wrote a note. I left it on the seat with the keys. And I never went back again.
Hammered is recorded and produced in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. It's narrated by Jill Haynie, produced by Maggie Briggs and Jill Haynie, and with sound design, editing, and music by Alexander Rodriguez. Our beautiful artwork was created by Lauren Caddick, and we'd like to send a special thanks out there to Minnie and Robin. You can check out our website, podcasthammered.com, and follow us on social media for updates.